So now I'm recording, but don't worry. Nothing you say will be held against you. So actually, Mrs. Guler over here shared a very interesting article from a rabbi. She didn't know who it was, and she wanted to tell me about it. It happened to be I wrote the article. We just found out. But the question is a question which I hear at least 3, 4, 5 times a year from people as they're starting to get connected to Torah, which is the question of how are there religious people who are not good? You have plenty of religious people who are good. You have plenty of non-religious people who are good. But the question of how could a person who's not religious not be good is not really a question anyone asks, because it's not necessarily a person that we would expect to be good. Not that being secular means we don't expect you to be good, but you're not involved in any type of pursuit that would let me know that that's of interest to you. It might be, it might not be. If a person is secular and good, we would probably think, being good is an important pursuit for that secular person. Maybe they're a secular humanist. Maybe they're spiritual, not necessarily religious. Maybe they have just a very good, strong moral compass or value system. But a person who's religious and not good, that's like Jews for Jesus. It's like you can't have the two together. I would say fried Oreos, except for they have that in Texas. But there's certain things you don't expect to go there. How do you have a religious person who's not good? That means to say a person who's quote-unquote dedicating their lives to living righteously, and yet they're not living righteously. How do we put the two things together?
Maybe it's very hard, Rabbi. I cannot all the time be kind to people and not cheat people.
Right. So very good. So one answer that Gonen is saying is the fact that just because you know what's right doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to always live according to those precepts.
I know that it's very good to eat healthy food, but look at me.
Right.
Knowing the path and walking it, those.
Right. It happened to be there was a professor in some university who was actually a professor of ethics who got in trouble for certain scandalous things, which we won't mention in a shul. And one of his students approached this professor and he said, "I don't get it. You teach ethics." And he said, "Does that mean a person who teaches geometry is a triangle?" Now, that sounds silly. It sounds, of course, silly and also funny at the same time. But for many religious people, there is that element. I teach it, meaning I live it, doesn't mean necessarily I have integrated it. For a lot of religious people, they have grown up that way. So to a secular person in the secular culture that they're used to, the person who's observant from birth, that is the culture that they're used to. So they are not actually religious, they are just culturally religious. It's a very hard thing for us to wrap our minds around, because we see a person with a beard and payas doing something wrong, and we're like, we don't get it, you haven't got a beard and payas. If it's a woman with a beard and payas, it's even more surprising. But if we see somebody with beard and payas, we think, but you're religious. The answer is oftentimes they're not religious, they are culturally religious. Just as a Jew, by the way, could be a bagels and lox Jew, a religious Jew could be a tefillin and Shabbos Jew. That's what they do, that's not who they are. They were brought up with it. So I've shared that example many times, and people are oftentimes very surprised. Wow, I never thought about the fact that a religious Jew could actually be just a culturally religious Jew, because that's what they know, and that's what their family does, and that's what their friends do. So they keep Shabbos, and they put on tefillin, and they wear the whole get-up, but do they care about it? Not necessarily. Have they integrated it? Is it something meaningful to them? Not necessarily. So I came up with a fascinating analogy, which you read, this article. It was a couple of months ago. It just occurred to me, the perfect analogy for this. Because the question I was addressing in that article is the question, does Torah make a person a better person? Does a connection with Torah make a person a better person? That was the question I was dealing with.
It gives you a very good infrastructure, but you need to do with it something.
Okay, exactly. So the analogy that came to me like an epiphany a couple months ago was the analogy of a mirror. And when I thought of it, I said, this is the perfect analogy.
That's very good.
You agree?
Yes, I do.
It's a great...
That's what it sucks. I couldn't remember who wrote it, which was good, but
it's a great analogy
Very
that I think really fits the scenario. Does a mirror make a person a better looking person?
Just reflects what's there.
Well, you would imagine that since it reflects what's there, what might happen?
you could improve upon
You
it.
could improve upon it. You would look into that mirror and you would say, this hair is out of place, let me comb it. Or if you're a woman, you might look in the mirror and say, I need a little bit more rouge. Okay, is that right? Is that not a word? Blush. I thought that's something you do. Okay, I need to blush more. So they look at things and they blush and they feel better.
Born with it.
Okay? Maybe you notice that your eyebrows need some thinning out. I see that in the malls these days. Okay? Maybe you notice that you need a shave. Maybe you notice a button is not buttoned. What? Unibrow? The blessings of a unibrow. You can notice a lot of... Maybe you notice a stain on your garment. And you go switch the garment. So, does a mirror make a person a better looking person? The answer is no. But it does increase the likelihood. I could have a mirror, see the stain, and say, eh. Or I could have a mirror and not look at it. I can have a mirror hanging and just never use it. It doesn't guarantee that I'll look better, but it does increase the chances. Because I might look at it, and if I look at it, I might take its advice and change the garment or shave or put on some more blush. That's the same with Torah. Torah by no means guarantees that a person will be a better person. It can't. We have a thing called free will. Free will means we decide if we're a better person. But Torah is like a mirror. It forces us to consider our morality, forces us to consider, are we living up to the examples that our patriarchs and matriarchs taught us about? It forces us to examine its lofty goals. It forces us to examine things that we should and shouldn't be doing. And although it can't necessarily cause us to do it, but it can create a reflection. It can create an imprint, an image of how we're doing, something to measure ourselves to, a measuring stick. And then at that point, the responsible, conscientious person might say, yes, I need to change. Yes, I need to start doing this. No, I really shouldn't be doing that. So Torah is like a mirror. But some people are born with mirrors on their walls. And that is a person who grew up religious. They've got mitzvahs hanging everywhere, pictures of great rabbis. They've got great role models everywhere. They grew up with mirrors everywhere. They go to day school. And for most people, the hope is, wow, you're surrounded by mirrors. That's going to really do something to you. But sometimes it does the opposite. Sometimes there's so many mirrors that what happens?
Rebel.
You don't even see them anymore. That's just a mirror on the wall. That becomes artwork. I've got all these mirrors in the wall. It's just artwork. And you don't even look anymore. Just culture. And so that's the example of Torah. We don't want to be a person who, like that culturally religious person, is just culturally Jewish, even if it means doing the mitzvahs. To be a conscientious Jew means to have mirrors on the wall and then use that mirror to propel ourselves forward. And we learn a lot about mitzvah. We learn a lot about what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. But there's an area that really isn't touched on so much. And that is the fundamental core beliefs of what it means to be a Jew. And what we're going to learn about in this class is that these aren't just beliefs. They're actually ways of forming ourselves. If we understand the 13 principles of faith, it will change us. Because our beliefs change us. How we act and what we do is molded by that which we believe. I always share with people, what is the most dangerous thing in the world? If I asked you, what is the most dangerous thing in the world? What would you say it is? It's also, by the way, the most which maybe the better word than dangerous, because that implies something negative. What's the most powerful thing in the world?
Love.
Huh?
Knowledge.
Speech? What?
Knowledge.
Knowledge? What? Truth. I have to get used to my, Hebrew talk. Truth. It's in Sephardi. I'm just messing with you. I love it. I love her thoughts. Ego. So I read this somewhere and I was like, wow, that's so true. Ideas. Ideas are the most powerful transformational elements in the world. Think about anything big that's happened throughout human history. It all came from an idea. Anything. Movements. Revolutions. Anything and ever means. Governments being formed, governments being destroyed. Ideas are the most powerful thing in the world. But a lot of times as Jews, because Judaism is so deed-based, we get lost sometimes in the do's and don'ts. And the more religious you get, the more you learn about halacha, Jewish law, which is incredibly detailed from the moment you wake up to the time you go to sleep, how you put on your shoes, how you tie those shoes, how you work, how you make blessings, interactions. Everything is defined by Jewish law, by halacha. And so sometimes when we're so focused on deeds, we forget about creed. But the reality is creed or ideas or beliefs are really the things that propels our deeds. So this course is going to be not about deeds as much as creed. It's going to be about what does it mean to be a Jew? What beliefs are central to being a Jew? And why are those beliefs central to being a Jew? The very first of the 13 principles. The very, very first. Let's open our Siddur now. Let's take a look at our very first principle. Is on 178. And this is the Ani Mamins, the 13 principles of faith from Maimonides. 13 principles of faith from Maimonides. And this is in every Siddur. Certainly Art School Siddurs, you'll find them. 13 principles of faith. So these 13 principles of faith, right? We're gonna take a look over here. 13 principles of faith. And there are 13 of them, but we'll see as we learn that really you can whittle them down to 3 basic principles. And the 3 basic principles are, there's a God, which happens to be the first one. Yeah. The Torah, we have a Torah from God. And number 3, reward and punishment, based on our allegiance to Torah. So we have 13 principles that can be refined down to 3. There's a God, there's a Torah, which means to say that God has expectations, and those expectations will be rewarded and punished, based on a person's, if they're doing them or not, if they're following them or not. So let's read together number 1. Let's read together number 1, and this class is primarily going to focus on number 1. I know we have 13, so don't worry, we'll keep it to 5 classes. But number 1 is so important, and the idea of number 1, that there's a God, is so important that it's worth dedicating an entire class to. So here we are in 179. I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed is his name, creates and guides all creatures, and that he alone made, makes, and will make everything. Okay, a little confusing. Let's read that again. I believe with a complete faith that the Creator, blessed is his name, creates and guides all creatures. So not only does he create the creatures, he also guides them. What we would call in Torah terminology, hashkacha pratis, or as the JWRP women on the Israel trip will call it, HP. Hashkacha pratis, divine providence. That not only does God create us, he also leads us. And that he alone made, makes, and will make everything. He's the man. He is the man. He is the one who made, makes, and will make everything. Only him. That means to say that God is the primary force of all of creation. of the whole world. It all emanates from Hashem. It all comes from Him. Nobody else. It all comes from Hashem. So let's step back just one moment, and then we'll get back into number one. Why do we have 13 principles? You know, Maimonides wrote these 13 principles of faith. But as many people point out, there's a lot of other principles that he doesn't include. We'll go through them soon, but there are ideas like free will, which are very central to Judaism, which are not in here. Many other ideas. Also, did you know that the Rambam did not write this? You know, we call it Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. Very interestingly, on the top, it says the 13 Principles of Faith. What does it leave out? Maimonides. You know why? I'm guessing. Maimonides didn't write the 13 Principles of Faith. It was written either by a student of his or someone later on, based on what Maimonides wrote. What did Maimonides write? In his magnum opus, the Yad HaChazaka, the mighty hand, he doesn't write that you should believe these things. He writes that there are 13 things that if you don't believe, you have no share in the world to come. 13-year-old would say, wowie zowie. 2 words. Okay. Okay. So the Rambam writes that if you don't believe in these 13 things, you have no place in the world to come. That's really extreme. That means to say, let me just clarify what that means. That means to say, and we'll see that these beliefs are basically about who God is, who isn't, that the Torah is from God, and that there's reward and punishment. Let's just whittle it down to those 3. There's a lot of details, but that's the primary 3. Maimonides is saying you could live a perfect moral life and have no place in the world to come because you don't believe in this. Or you don't believe in one of these 13. You believe in 12 out of 13. Right? In school, that would be like an A. The Rambam is saying it's all or nothing. If you don't believe in this, you have no share in the world to come. How do we understand that? That means to say you could have, let's create a hypothetical scenario. You have a person, let's call this person, give me a name.
A blank.
Henry. Okay. We have a person, Henry, who is really not such a nice guy. He cheats on his taxes. He kicks animals on his way to work. Squirrel. Okay? He sees old ladies. He pushes them. He does everything you shouldn't do. But he believes in the 13 principles of faith. Okay?
He believes, but he doesn't practice.
He doesn't practice. I didn't say practice. He believes in the 13 principles of faith. And just like any person, occasionally he'll have a good day, and he might do something nice for someone. Maybe you can count 100 in his entire lifetime good deeds. According to Maimonides, he has a place in the world to come.
He didn't say what kind of place.
Right. And by the way, that person also has to deal with the pain of going through, I hate the English word which they call hell, because it's not really the Jewish understanding. Like we imagine fire and brimstone and this guy with pointy horns and a toothpick. Oh, not a pitchfork. Toothpick sounds nicer. That's not really the Jewish view. The Jewish view is really that it is a very incredible pain, but it's not a physical pain. We're talking about a soul here. A soul doesn't get poked with fire or pitchforks. A soul experiences the incredible pain when they go to the next world and God says, here's your life, and he rolls out the Kodak. That's way too old. He rolls out the iPhone footage, iPhone 6, and he says, this is your life. See how you kicked that squirrel on the way to work? That was pretty bad. It's like, oh boy, that was bad. See how you pushed that old lady Gertrude? Okay, Aunt Jemima? You kicked Aunt Jemima? Right, no good. And then he points to how one day he put a quarter in a tzedakah box. He's like, wow, that was good. Could have put more, but good. Okay? And he goes through his whole life. And the pain is seeing what he could have been. In a world of truth, where everything is clear, he sees an unexamined life. And the pain of seeing an unexamined life in a world of clarity is beyond anything that you can imagine how painful that is. It's sitting in front of your parents, having them look at video of what you were doing that you never want them to see. You can't even imagine. That's worse than like fire and pitchfork. It's a different kind of pain. And when a person, through that process, they rectify, they're able to see and sort of clear up the wrongdoings that they did, then they can move on to the happy place. Their place is going to be pretty small because they didn't do a lot of good, but they have a place. They've got a place in the stadium. It's going to be in the nosebleeds. They're not going to see much except for like a few little ants throwing a ball. And they're not even sure if it's a ball or a squirrel. But again, they're going to be in the stadium. Whereas, let's take another person. Give me another name.
Wow.
Susie. Middle name is Barak. Susie is the Mother Teresa, the secular Mother Teresa. She volunteers at the soup kitchen. She walks Aunt Jemima across the street. She sees a squirrel. She knits an outfit for it. Okay, this is Aunt Jemima. Okay, she is sweet and syrupy. Okay, oh, not Aunt Jemima. This is Susie Barak. Okay, sorry, getting my characters mixed up. Okay, and she truly lives a very reflective life, a conscientious life, a moral life. But she doesn't believe in the 13 principles of faith. She doesn't believe in God. She doesn't, or maybe she believes in God, but she doesn't believe in certain things. According to Maimonidies, she has no place in the world to come. This doesn't sound fair. Does everybody agree with me that this doesn't sound fair?
Mm-hmm.
It sounds terrible. It sounds like what Abraham said to God. How can the king of justice not do justice? Can the master of justice, can God, the ultimate Dayan, the ultimate judge, not act righteously? How is this possible? So what's the answer? And this is so important. This is so important to understand the 13 principles. Maimonides isn't saying you can't be a moral person if you don't believe in the 13 principles. You can be. You could be a great person. But you're not going to have a place in the world to come. Why? Because a place in the world to come is reserved for a person who lives a transcendent life. Not an earthly life. A person who lives an earthly life can have a good earthly life and die on earth. That's fine. But a person who wants to have a transcendent life, meaning to say a life that transcends this world, that goes beyond this world, where life continues past this earthly domain, has to live a transcendent life. Doesn't necessarily mean a good life, but a transcendent life. Of course, the better you are, the more transcendent it will be. But if you want to be, let's take a Star Trek analogy. I was never a Star Trek person, but I remember in the few times I saw it, that there was that little portal. Maybe, do we have any Trekkies in the room that can tell me what they're called? Oh, okay. You're not supposed to raise your hand. You're supposed to go like that. You're supposed to split your fingers. What do they call the portal machine where you go and you go in that and then you
Teleport.
Is it a teleporter? You can't teleport without what?
Need a button.
You got to go in the machine. If I say, beam me up, Scotty, and I stand and I sit in the captain's chair, what will happen? Nothing. I can't get teleported unless I go in the teleporter machine.
That's actually not true.
That's not-
Is that okay? Was that a bad analogy?
Yeah.
I just really revealed my ignorance, didn't I? There are ways of teleporting without being in a machine?
They lock a location and teleport you from
Oh
one
my
area to
gosh.
another. They beam you up.
What's a better example?
I don't know.
Pretend like it's
that
that
doesn't
way.
work.
Let's pretend that I was right. Okay?
Elevator to the Empire State Building.
Okay, you can't get to Cambodia in one day. Can you get there in one day?
Yeah.
Darn it. Unless you go on an airplane. What's that?
No, an elevator to the Empire State Building.
You can't get to the top.
Okay, you can't get to the top. Are there stairs?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't know if you want to use the stairs.
Okay. Imagine the stairs are blocked off. You can't get to the top unless you go in the elevator. What Maimonides seems to be saying is, I'm not telling you that a person who doesn't believe in these 13 things can't be good. Of course he can be good. But you can't get to the top of the Empire State Building. It's not because that person who believes in these things is quote-unquote better than the person who doesn't. It's just that they stepped in the elevator. Do you see this? This is very, very important. It's not that the person who believes in the 13 principles is a better person than the person who doesn't. It's just that they're in the game. They're in the transcendent game. Let me explain it a little bit clearer. One of the 13 principles, right, is for example, the belief in God. It happens to be number 1. Let's say a person is a great person morally, but he doesn't believe or she doesn't believe in God. What is the next world? Does anybody know the Jewish view of the next world?
Being close to God.
Being close to God, that's really what it is. In the words of the Ramchal, Ramosha Chaim Lutzato, in The Path of the Just, he writes that the next world is a place, lehanot miziv hashchina, to get pleasure from Hashem's presence. Now that doesn't sound so exciting, like whoop-de-doo. But the reality is, again, if you knew what God was, it's the ultimate source of truth, love, perfection. It is literally like spending a day with the person that you've thought about your whole life. If only I could have one day. Except for multiply that by infinity. It's incredible. But let's say you don't believe in God. It's not that you're being punished because you don't believe in God that you're not going to have a place in the world to come. It's that if you don't believe in God, you have no place in the world to come, because the place in the world to come is what? Being close to God. Let's say it a little bit differently. The Jewish understanding of the world to come is that a person creates a relationship with God in this world, but it's not fully experienced because you're physical, God's ethereal. How can I connect to this God who's up there and I'm down here? I can get feelings of it. I can get feelings of connection. I can feel God in my life, but I can't fully appreciate it. It's almost like an engaged couple. We'll talk about a religious engaged couple. The first time I held hands with my wife was after we got married. Never even held hands, right? It's magical the first time you do, because it's like, ah. You don't even have to do anything else. It's like, I'm done for the day. Woo!
That's all I can take.
It's like, that pinky was intense. Super intense pinky. Pinky touch.
Still has it.
Okay, so now a person, I do that because whenever my wife comes to my class, which is rarely, I've got to embarrass her at some point. It's part of my job. See there, we got blush. We spoke about blush and we got blush. So imagine you're an engaged couple and you're not touching, and certainly, or maybe you're a couple that's touching, but you're not actually going to consummate the marriage. You're going to wait for the wedding day. So while you're together during that engagement period, it's wonderful. You can feel each other, not physically, but you can feel each other. You communicate. You have a connection. But when you get married, wow, incredible. Now you really can feel each other. Emotionally, physically, you really can connect. You can become one. And then you look back on the engagement period, you can't even compare it. It's like, wow, thank God I got through that period to get to this period. That's what you really think about. That's, to a certain extent, the way our relationship with God goes. In this world, it's like we're engaged. We communicate, we have a connection, but we can't consummate that relationship. That's the place of the world to come. The world to come is a place, it's like the wedding day. It's like we worked our whole lives, we created a connection, and now we can enjoy it. But let's say, for example, a person is a very good person, but they don't work on creating a connection with God, either because that's not something they're interested in, or because they don't believe in God. It doesn't really matter. They have no place in the world to come, not because of a punishment. It's just cause and effect. You never created a relationship with God, and the world to come is the consummation of the relationship that you created. You could be a great person. God's not punishing you by saying you are damned to never having a place in the world to come. It's not about that at all. It's just the world to come is your relationship with God. if you never created it, it's not there.
If you don't believe,
Wait, hold on 1 second. Does everybody hear this? It's not a punishment, it's cause and effect. If I don't create a relationship with God, right, that means to say I can't live a transcendent life in the way that I'm talking about. I don't mean transcendent in terms of meaningful, but I cannot transcend past this life. I lived a meaningful life, I made a big difference in this life, and then I'll die a physical life. That's fine. And that person would say, I'm happy with that. Good, because I'm to hate, be happy. But if you want to live a transcendent life, then you have to start living a transcendent life now. Then you can feel the consummation of that relationship in the next world. And Maimonides is telling you in these 13 principles, because this is what Maimonides does say. I'll get to you in 1 second, go down. Maimonides doesn't say, I believe with a perfect faith like it says in these 13 principles. What he does say is the opposite. If you don't believe that there's a God who leads and guides and he is the only one who creates you, then you have no place in the world to come. Next thing. If you don't believe that the Torah is from God, you have no place in the world to come. Somebody later, either a student or somebody later, took his negative statements and turned them into positive affirmations. So instead of, because it would be pretty much a bummer if every day when you're reading this, like some people read this every day, it's like, number 6. You know, I don't believe with complete, if a person doesn't believe with complete faith that all the words of the prophets are true, they have no place in the world to come. Number 7. That would be pretty rough. So what did somebody do? They turned this into, and nowadays everybody's big into affirmations. Like you say them every day. Right? The person who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul, they put on top of their ceiling every night they looked at it. I'm going to make a book and I'm going to make $1 million off this book. And he looked at it every day. Right? So somebody put a positive spin on it, and every day many people say these positive affirmations to ensure that they start creating the transcendent relationship which is based on these 13 principles. Go Nan, and then we'll get to Yalinia.
I think most of the people that don't believe in God also don't believe in the next life.
That's right.
So
And that's why they would say it's not a punishment. They would say, of course, they don't have a place in the world to come because there is no world to come. And that's right. That's right. But there are also some people that just never stop to contemplate it. And that's sad. And they're not being punished either. It's just a cause and effect. You didn't create your world to come. You don't have it. That's actually a good way of putting it. The world to come is not something that exists. It's something that you create. So if you're actively creating it, which means to say you're actively working on creating a relationship with the Almighty, then it's there for you when you die. You can't complain if you don't cook food Erev Shabbos on Friday afternoon, where's my cholent Saturday morning? You didn't cook it. But I'm a good person. That's great. I believe you're a good person. But you can't complain about not having cholent if you didn't make cholent. The world to come is something you create, not only through good deeds, although good deeds is the primary element, but the prereq is you have to believe that there's a God in order to have that relationship with God in the next world. Then all the good deeds that are part of that relationship and part of what it means to be a Jew and part of what it means serving God, that's going to constitute the 95% of it. But this is like getting off the ground. You can't even get off the ground if there's no relationship. Be a good person here, but not in the world to come. Yeah. So was that your idea? That was yours? Yeah, Aline.
So what does Judaism believe happens to such a soul? So for example, I understand the idea of what you're saying. So yes, let's say radar. Humans don't have radar, so we can't use it to see things. So if we think about an ability or skill, if they don't engage in that talent, they can't just see God when they get there. It's just not visible to them. They're not engaged. It just doesn't exist. They didn't build that relationship. But what happens to that soul? We believe in souls. So okay, they're there. There's no God. So what happens?
That's a good question. I happened to speak to God last week and asked him that very question. I said, she's going to ask me. Listen, I'm not God. I don't know. I can't say fully. I can tell you different things I've seen in Jewish literature.
Yes, so what are those?
And that is that there is a concept in the Torah of karet. Karet means that your soul is cut off. It talks about that if you do certain very bad sins. One of them, interestingly enough, which you wouldn't think would be in that category, is eating bread on Pesach. Eating leavened food on Pesach
You need one time in all your life, or
Well, you can always do tshuva. You can always repent.
Okay.
But if, Gonen's like, I'm done. I'm out of here, Rabbi. I tried it out for 2 years, but I ate bread when I was like 12 in kibbutz. Like I was feeding Mary the cow and like chomping on some falafel and pita. I'm out of here. Like, no. So a person can always repent. These are sins where if a person does them and never does anything about it, there's always repentance. Working on Yom Kippur, different things that are not eating on Yom Kippur, working on Yom Kippur. So there are different things where a person can get that. My understanding is this: it's the same idea. Your soul is cut off. Cut off means cut off from God. Again, you never create a relationship. It's not there. Now, what happens to that soul? Because again, a soul is a spiritual thing.
Right, so it doesn't cease to exist.
Right. I was actually speaking to my father. I was in Atlanta this last weekend, and my dad asked me a very interesting question. We always have these fascinating questions when I speak to my father. I definitely did not grow up in an Orthodox home, a very traditional conservative home. So we always have like fascinating Jewish discussions when I come home about Judaism and things like that. And he asked me a very interesting question. He said, Yogi, how often do you think about the world to come? I was like, wow, it's such an interesting question. Usually it's like very like pointed, questions about certain things in the world or certain very, very particular anecdotes. He's like, how often do you think about the world to come? And, I thought about it a little, and my answer was, every day. Which is interesting because the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Father, says a person should serve God not out of fear of punishment, but to serve God because out of love. And yet I do think about it every day. That was like an interesting thing to think about. But what I told my father is I think to the degree that a person is faced with spiritual challenges and works on overcoming them, they're going to think more and more about the world to come. What do I mean by that? Let's say a person just goes through life doing whatever they want to do. They don't really have to consider, gosh, should I do that? Should I not do that? I mean, there are always examples, should I speed, should I not speed, because they're going to get a ticket. But throughout their life, we're not talking about crimes here. Generally, I do what I want to do. There's no question of like, is that appropriate spiritually or not? Like, as long as it doesn't break the law, it's cool. A Jew who's following Torah every day is faced with a myriad different issues and questions and problems and struggles. I really want to eat that Whataburger. Whataburger. I mean, it's a perfect name. I really want to eat that Whataburger. And I've got to decide as I drive by Whataburger, like, to eat or not to eat. That is the question. And that's really intense. Yeah.
I was just, first of all, I wanted to comment, wouldn't they be reincarnated?
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay,
Yeah.
and secondly, I just think it's interesting how, like in Christianity,
Yes.
Gehenna or hell would be a punishment, but from what I hear you're saying is you don't even get to go to Gehenna.
Right.
And I was going to say, Laurie Plotnick makes the analogy of Gehenna hell being a hospital.
Right. That's right. That's a very good analogy.
Yeah. So I think it like, oh, you don't even get to go.
That's good. I'll take that as an analogy. Read it in an article to come.
of the Middle Ages, So
Right. No. So what I told my father is, when every day, one of the mitzvahs for a man is to watch their eyes, to not look at things that are immodest. It's a very, very difficult challenge for men, especially in the 21st century where everything, I mean, you walk into a grocery store, there's like oranges, like that's got to be safe. There's like a woman in a bikini holding an orange. It's like, darn it, they took away my oranges. Like, it's like everywhere you go. Because the advertising industry knows that sexuality sells. You walk by and you see the magazines, and every magazine has somebody, airbrushed to perfection. And it's a real big challenge. So for a man, they're going to walk into a grocery store and they're working very hard on guarding their eyes for purity. And so the world to come is a very important part of that person's life, because, see, when a person is always trying to work on themselves and trying to guard themselves from things which that are improper, they have to think about the long game. You know, in golf you have the short game, putting, and long game is where you're driving really far. Right now for the man, what's easier and more fun? Looking at the orange model? Or trying to buy the orange and not looking at that model?
No, better
Where's the store with the model?
What?
Where's the store with the model?
You know,
Alex,
there's some guy already wanting to shop. He's like, you know what? I usually shop at Safeway. Over. I'm going to the orange model supermarket from now on. But that is, by the way, that's like classic guy move. You know, like I'm switching. No more will I go to Tom Thumb. You know. Aldi, by the way, best orange. No, I'm just kidding. Their citrus models are just woo. No. So for a person who deals with those struggles, it's much more easy and more fun and exciting. You want to look at that model because she's pretty, and you're attracted to that, and that's very healthy and normal. So how do you stop yourself from doing something which, in the short run, is pleasurable? You have to remind yourself that there's a bigger game to be played. The short game is to look at the model. The long game is to withhold yourself from doing something which is pleasurable right now for the sake of something more pleasurable down the road. So how do you do that? You're constantly thinking about the end goal. Not so much that you're consumed with reward and punishment, but you have to remind yourself that there is an end to the pain of walking by the orange model, and an end that I'm going to be rewarded, and I'm creating a holy relationship with God. I'm creating a holier relationship with my wife by not looking at the orange model. I'm creating all these a holier relationship to my soul by keeping myself pure. I've got to remember the end game. That keeps me going. And that, by the way, is why that same Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that says don't serve God out of fear of punishment, rather serve God out of love. You know what it says right at the end? It's incredible. Completely contradicts itself. Love. It's like the hippie Mishnah. Just do it because of love. And then you know what it says right at the end? And let the fear of heaven be upon you. This is the most bipolar Mishnah. It's like, okay, it's like love. Only love.
Because if
Fear God.
Because if you don't, you'll be far from
Right.
God's love. It's still about love. Just
Right. Well, so the answer, of course, is that the ultimate love. That is what it's about. You ultimately want to just do everything out of love for God. But you know what? There are going to be times where you're going to be challenged. And it's not going to be easy to do it out of love, because right now I really love that myself. And out of love for myself, I want to eat that Whataburger. I want to speak that juicy gossip to my friend who loves hearing the newest Plano gossip. Okay, very exciting.
What's like with fear and love in the 6 constant mitzvahs?
That's right. You have to have the fear to stop you when love isn't enough. It's the same, by the way, with marriage, for those of you that are married. You want to do things, ultimately everything should be about love. But sometimes you're not feeling it. Sometimes you're in a little bit of a rougher spot in your marriage. And you might consider doing something which would hurt your marriage. That's when you need fear. You know what? I'm not feeling it right now. If it was just out of love, I might do this thing that would compromise my relationship, but I have fear of what that might lead to in our relationship, so I'm going to abstain. Not because I love that person right now, because that's not where I'm at right now, but fear. Fear that I know I'll get back to that love place, and by then I could ruin it by doing this evil deed right now, which would compromise our relationship. So you got to have both. You got to have love and fear. But these 13 things create the ability to live a transcendent life. Not a good life. A good life is going to be a much bigger picture. That's not really what this class is about. Although, of course, it does lead to goodness if you have these beliefs. It should if you can integrate them. But it's about living not necessarily just a good life, but a transcendent life. Maimonidies is saying, if you have these 13 principles, you're now in the game. You're in the world to come game. Because these things can lead to a relationship with God, and the world to come is just the finishing, the end product of your relationship to the world to come. But back to Aline's question, what happens to that soul? According to Kabbalah, there's a concept called Gilgul Nefeshos, which means to say reincarnation. It's not just an Eastern concept. Actually, it's mentioned in Kabbalah that if a person doesn't fulfill their job in this world, they get brought back as a tomato. No.
They get recycled.
No, they get another chance. By the way, how many of you are familiar with the story of Jonah? Jonah and the whale? Everybody know that story? Did you know that according to the Vilna Gaon, it's an analogy for reincarnation? How many of you knew that? Raise your hand if you knew that. Anybody knew that?
I think I was at your class.
A couple of Yom Kippurs ago when I talked about this. The Vilna Gaon says that Jonah, the first part of his life is God tells him, go to Nineveh and give this prophecy that they should repent, otherwise the city will be destroyed. And Jonah's like, I'm not interested. We're not going to go into the reasons why right now. And he tries to escape God by running away to the ocean, which, by the way, you might say, what a stupid prophet. How can you escape God? But prophecy, by the way, you should know, can only be attained in a state of joy and peace. And so when you're on a boat, and we're not talking modern boats,
He made himself miserable.
right? You literally make yourself miserable. You can't get prophecy. So he actually was successfully running away from God. That's why God doesn't speak to him when he's on the boat. He just tries to get him back onto land somehow. But he goes on this boat, and he ends up being thrown overboard, and he gets swallowed by a giant fish, whatever it was. And he's there for 3 days. The Vilna Gaon says the 3 days represents the world to come. He has a whole thing on 3 days, what 3 days represents. And then he gets spit back onto land, and there he does his mission. And the Vilna Gaon says that was his reincarnation. He was going back onto land, meaning back into life, into a body, and now he gets the chance to rectify what he got wrong. So there is that concept. There is that concept of reincarnation. But we want to get it right, Aline, this time. We don't want to wait for, to get recycled. We want to get it right this time. Any questions? Yeah.
I'm just going to
And then
say,
Judy, we'll get to you.
I don't know, we were talking a little bit about the world to come and kind
Yeah.
of what we think we can expect.
Right.
But to me, it actually doesn't sound that bad to be reincarnated.
What- right.
It sounds good. I mean, to get a chance to do it all again with all the good and the bad, I'm like, great. It's with God,
Right.
Experience him at all.
Right, so that's only because you don't, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but you don't understand, and by the way, neither do I, what the world to come is. The closest analogy I can give is there was an old Simpsons episode. All of my best analogies, by the way, come from The Simpsons. It's one of the most brilliant shows ever. And, Homer in his dream is in this candy land, and there's chocolate bunnies jumping around, and he picks one up and takes a bite, and the bunny keeps jumping, and it's just a cotton candy clouds. If we were to imagine, and that, of course, that's physical, but if we were to imagine that the world to come is that kind of a place, and of course that doesn't really do justice, you wouldn't think that coming back to this world, and thank God, by the way, what that tells me, by the way, I want to tell you, by the way, what that tells me about you, Olga. That tells me you're living a very happy life, which is incredible, because you're the exception to the rule. Because for you to say it's happy to come back just shows you're living a great life. So we'll have to schmooze later. I want to hear your secrets. But for most people, and I do mean most, life is a lot of series of challenges sprinkled with good events and happy feelings, but there's a lot of challenge, and thank God you're very blessed if that's your feeling. But for most people, even the Midrash says, most people will die without even half of their desires being fulfilled. The world to come is a place where all of your desires are fulfilled. So if you were to understand what that was, you would know why reincarnation is not a happy thing. And by the way, if you're reincarnated, who knows what kind of life. It's not like you're guaranteed to go back to your good life. Where do you go?
Bigger in India.
Who knows? Judy.
Well, first I'd like to thank you for asking one of my questions about the souls and where they go. But the other thing is, Rabbi, well, let's put it this way. I was at Partners in Torah recently with a very wonderful teacher who led a group of us ladies, and she pointed out various places, like before our prayers, where it reads that every Jew has a place in the world to come.
Right.
But it mentions nothing, and
So that's because you didn't read the whole Mishnah. They only give you the first part of the Mishnah. It's a Mishnah in Sanhedrin, and it's also one of these funny Mishnahs because it says all Jews have a place in the world to come, and that's, by the way, all you see in the Mishnah and Ethics of the Fathers. But in the actual Mishnah it says except for, and then it gives you like a whole long laundry list of people.
Shimon Esrei.
Yeah.
It reads that there will be a place.
And by the way, what the commentaries say is when it says all of Bnei Yisrael, all the Jews have a place in the world to come, it means to say a person who's attached themselves to the name Yisrael. When it says all Jews, it means everybody who's accepted what it means to be a Jew. And this is very much a part of that, yeah.
I was going to say, Rabbi Rich, we're doing this every Shabbos.
Yeah.
And he said every Jew has the opportunity
Right.
to go to the world to come.
Correct. And again, it's the same idea. You can create your world to come,
Right.
but you don't have to.
You're saying if you believe in the 13 principles, you're creating that.
If you believe in the 13 principles, it means you're now in the game. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a good place in the world to come. Again, you could be in the nosebleeds. But it means you're playing the game now. You could play Monopoly, roll the dice, and be the biggest loser, but you're in the game. These are the spiritual prerequisites to be in the game. Because as much as a person might say, I have a relationship with God, if they don't understand who God is and isn't, if they don't understand how he relates to us and how he doesn't relate to us, if you don't understand the concept of our relationship to sin and reward, it's really a made-up relationship. It's like the relationship that feels warm and fuzzy to me, but it's not the actual real relationship. This is telling you what is and isn't our relationship to God. And if you know that, you can play the game. That's all it is. But it's supremely important. Supremely. You can't even get your feet off the ground if you don't have it.
As I truly believe the Torah is word for word from God, I think maybe I would feel better if these 13 principles were also written and given by God.
Well, they are. They are. The Rambam just quotes them, but they're all from Torah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm one thing I'm not going to do in this class, because it is a 5-week course, not a 13-week course, is to go through and give you example after example about where you see in the Torah that this idea is true.
Just knowing that it is part of the Torah, I'm good.
Oh, okay.
I'm good.
You're easy. You're very easy. So I want to end...
From the written Torah.
Yes, from the written Torah. Now, it ultimately, a lot of it comes from the oral Torah, but all of the oral Torah can be shown in the written Torah. I gave a really cool example. I was talking to my dad over the weekend. I said, let me give you an example of like how everything in the oral Torah can be shown in the written Torah. This is an example I love and tell everybody I teach. You know, it says an eye for an eye. We've all heard that, an eye for an eye. So by the way, if you go to like Iran or stuff, they actually do that. Like, don't go to Iran, okay? So, an eye for an eye sounds like you poke out someone's eye, I'll poke out your eye. You hurt somebody, you punch them, you get punched. So the oral tradition says, for a number of different reasons, which we won't go into, that it's not literal. You don't actually poke out someone's eye, you have to pay the worth of the eye, the financial restitution of how much the eye is worth. So the Vilna Gaon, the great sage from Vilna, he says, you know where you see that in the oral, you know where you see that in the Torah? Because the oral tradition, I give this example because the oral tradition sounds like it's completely going against what the written Torah says. Written Torah sounds very literally, poke out the eye. And here we're saying, don't poke out the eye. He says even something like that where it's completely seems like the opposite. I can show you exactly. Anybody know where? Anybody ever heard this?
The oars and wars.
Is that from this? I don't know.
I don't know. That's from.
Sounded good.
Like the ox pokes out the other ox's eye and who pays for the.
Well, here we're talking about a person, though.
Oh, okay. Slaves.
Right?
Slaves.
Oh, that's different. That's different. But here it says very clearly. So he says a very fascinating idea. He says, what does it say in Hebrew? It doesn't say an eye for an eye. You know what it says? Ayin tachat ayin. What does tachat mean?
Under.
All of you who know the word tuchis should know what tachat means.
Okay.
An eye under an eye is. It should have actually said ayin
For an eye.
bishvil ayin, for an eye. An ayin ba'avur ayin. Shouldn't say ayin tachat ayin, an eye under an eye. What is an eye under an eye? Of course, it means an eye for an eye, but why use this weird language? So Vilna Gaon says an incredible idea. He says it's a code. It's a Torah code. He says, if you poke out the eye, you know what you have to do? Under the eye. Ooh. Okay, what does that mean? Under the eye? He says, look at the alphabet. Imagine Aleph is first, Bet is second, Gimel's third, and you go down from there. Take a look at the letters Ayin, Yud, Nun, that's how you spell the word Ayin, I, and look at the letters underneath them. Look under the eye. Under the Ayin, Samech Ayin, Pei. Under the Yud, Kaf. Under the Nun, Lam Mim Nun, Samech. Those are the letters that spell out Kaf, Samech, Pei, Kesef. What does Kesef mean? Money.
Wow.
Which means financial restitution. So everything in the oral Torah, if you have spiritually perceptive eyes, you'd be able to see how you can actually see it, the oral tradition, inside of the written tradition. So let's end with one idea, and that is the concept of emunah. Let's take a look at the first principle of faith right here. The first principle of faith. I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed is His name, creates and guides all creatures, and that He alone made, makes, and will make everything. He's the one who created everything. So a lot of times we think, and we'll get more into this next week, a lot of times we think it's like, does a Jew have to believe this? Does a Jew have to believe that? And that makes it sound like belief is something you can decide to do or not to do. What this is saying is, let me introduce you to a reality. And this is a very different way of seeing the 13 principles. It's not, see, when you think about belief, it sounds like, this person believes this person believes that. Okay, Jews believe this, Christians believe that. That's not the way you're supposed to learn this. That makes it sound like, everybody does their own thing. This person believes that. That's what makes them happy. This is what makes them feel happy. Jews believe this because that's what makes Jews feel happy. Okay? That's not what it is. What the 13 principles is saying, this is reality. These are the 13 reality checks. And either you're with the reality, so you can be part of that reality, or you're not with that reality, so you're not with that reality. So God creates, will create, created, is the original source of all creation. And you could decide to ride that wave. God's the creator. I'm riding that wave through life. I can decide not to. And that's the word emunah, which is classically defined as faith, is not really faith. Did you know that there's no word for faith in Hebrew? You might say, well, emunah, but it's not. Do you know what emunah, how it's always used in Chumash? Anybody know? Anybody know? When Moses is described at the end of the Torah, God says, Bechol beisi ne'emanu. In my entire house, he was my most faithful. Could he say that he had the most faith? Do you think Moses needed faith? What was he doing all day?
Hanging out with God.
Playing Tetris or Candy Crush? He was hanging out with Hashem. He's like, they got together in the tent of meeting. Yeah, that's where they got together. It's like the original Starbucks. Okay? They got together, they schmoozed, he got prophecy. Do you think it makes any sense at the end of the Torah to say, Moses was my most believing person? He believed in me the most? It's like ridiculous. It's like saying, I believe so much in this table. I really believe. It's ridiculous. I'm touching it. It's here. What does it mean when the Torah says, in my whole house, Moses was my most emunidik? He was filled with the most emunah. It means he was the most faithful. Not faith, but faithful. Which means to say you know something and you live according to that knowledge. Many people know things, like Gonen said about dieting. Right? You can know what you're supposed to eat. Doesn't guarantee that you'll do it. If you faithfully follow the diet, that means not only do you know it, but you also practice it. So these, although it translates it as I believe with each of the 13 principles, what really properly translated it should be is I am faithful. Meaning to say I faithfully execute a life where I recognize that God is the creator and that he guides my life and that he alone is the one who created and creates and guides me. And so this is really the 13 principles of faithfulness. Not faith, but faithfulness. Can we live lives where our actions are according to our understandings? All right, folks, we're going to stop there. Class number 1. I hope you enjoyed. Next week, we're going to get into an incredible discussion about what does it mean to live faithfully and what does the word faith in its classical sense mean, because it does sound like you're believing in something which you don't know. But of course we do know, because we had Mount Sinai, we had the 10 plagues, we had all these things. And we're going to get into actually looking at each of the 13 principles to see how we can start living a transcendent life. Thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Can you stop it? Yeah. So now I'm recording, but don't worry. Nothing you say will be held against you.